Welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things podcast. I am your host, Dave West, and we are talking to a luminary from the comics world tonight. Welcome to the show, Andrew Lee Griffith.
Hi guys, thanks so much. That's very flattering. Luminary, that's a new one.
Well, and I wanted to say welcome back to the show because we have recorded before, but that was a live panel at Dragon Con.
Yep, with Larry.
Which was a whole other thing with, speaking of luminaries, Mr. Larry Hama.
An actual luminary, yeah. Deserving of the accolades.
Well, I don't know. You've got quite a. We were just talking before we started recording. For any of the listeners or the viewers who may not be aware, there's a comic book site out there called freshcomics.us that has not complete, but a fairly decent record of a lot of the work that you've done. And it's obviously, we know G.I. Joe, Transformers, Mask, Micronauts, like a lot of the stuff that we talk about on Audible Interlude all the time. You've had a hand in over the years, but plenty of other stuff as well, and we'll get to all of it. Before we do, though, how'd you get started? Like, what's your background when you were a kid? What's the stuff that was inspiring you?
Yeah, I can kind of go through my little origin story, I guess. My first fandom was probably G.I. Joe. I remember walking into a store we have in our area called Hills, which is I guess Target's the closest thing now. It's like a department store, and going in the toy aisle and just seeing at that time you'd see a whole row, it felt like, of carded figures and boxes and stuff, and I'd never seen I don't know, something that really got my attention like that before. So I asked my parents for stuff for my birthday, and a couple days later or weeks later for my birthday, I got Snake Eyes, the Mobat, and the mobile missile system. And I was kind of hooked on G.I. Joe from there. And then, and I'd been into Star Wars and stuff, of course. I mean, the movies had been out. My older brother was old enough to have seen the first one, but I wasn't, in the theater, I mean. But, yeah. So we had the toys around the house. We'd get them for Christmas and stuff. But it wasn't my thing that I discovered. It was just kind of there already in the consciousness, But I don't know. I became a big G.I. Joe fan. And then a couple of years later, a similar thing where my older brother came home from school and he's like, all the kids are talking about this new toy, this new craze, Transformers. So we went to the mall. We pretty much forced my parents to drive us to a different store in the mall that had a lot of toys. And sure enough, a whole row of, transforming robot cars and planes. It was perfect for, an 8-year-old. And then I think I got a red Bumblebee. My brother got Prowl. He had a little more money, of allowance money and stuff. But anyway, we went home, and then the comics were starting to come out. The shows were starting to come out, and got hooked on Transformers too. And at the same time, I was getting into comics, so I was reading Spider-Man and the Secret Wars from the '80s, and getting into X-Men and Batman and stuff like that. And so the crossover with Spider-Man and the early Transformers issues was perfect for me. I think my first comic I ever bought myself was the Secret Wars issue where he gets the black suit, and then I was really into the whole Venom thing and the black suit saga and all that. So anyway, yeah, I was really into that stuff. I was trying to draw G.I. Joe stuff, Transformers stuff, Star Wars comic stuff, but I mean, looking back, probably pretty good for my age, but one thing I could never draw was Transformers. It just would never work for me. I never felt good about it. But I draw my little comic strips and comic book pages.
Looking at your resume, that makes no sense.
Right? So at some point, I don't know. I got I went to school for art, and I got more serious about it. I wanted to be a gallery artist, a painter, and I got kind of snobby about it, comics and stuff. I kind of fell out of that stuff. And then, I still had interest in it, and I'd watch the Beast Wars show when I'd see it in the 90s, and I'd watch, the Spider-Man or X-Men shows, whatever's on, kind of thing. So I still had interest in that stuff, and I was always into still into Star Wars and everything. And but then I got married, kind of settled down. I was home more, started drawing again, and I started posting stuff on fan sites, taking part in fan projects. There was this thing called Mosaics, where they had a one-page fan comic that people could make, and they distribute it on all the fan sites for Transformers. So I took part in that. I kind of started getting noticed a bit by, I was taking part a lot in online forums and fandoms and stuff. and I took part in this contest for IDW to be the next Transformers cover artist. And like I think like 500 some people took part in it, and I got first place in the first 2 rounds. In the third round, I placed in the top 10, but I didn't get like number 1, so I wasn't like straight up recommended to IDW as the winner. But it got me enough notice where the editors noticed me, and one day I got an email from Chris Ryle saying, "Do you ever draw movie Transformers?" Which I hadn't at the time. So I quickly did some sketches, which I just came across the other day of like I did like movie Bumblebee holding a VW Beetle, and like I drew like movie Starscream. I sent them off, and I didn't hear anything from for a while until there was a comic that was falling behind a bit. They wanted to bring me in to help ink it, and that led to doing like fill-in pages, and then I got like my own issue and then my own series, you know. So I kind of like got a break coming in to help when someone was falling behind. They had like I think they were doing other stuff for Hasbro too, and they couldn't keep up with the comics, so they brought me in to help. And that kind of led to one thing to another, and that's kind of how it started.
Were you, because obviously the movie Transformers, the designs are much more involved and complex. Was that intimidating? Like the thought of like, oh, you want me to draw these like tons of wires, invisible parts, and whatever else, or was that kind of exciting as a challenge?
Oh, it was for sure it was a challenge. But I was willing to take it on because it was my break into comics. It was my chance, you know. I do remember some phone calls actually with the editor Denton at the time, who I was like a step away from a panic attack. Like I don't know how I can keep up with the pace of this, getting pages in and drawing all these intricate parts. And I remember he was like, "Yeah, shadows are your friend when it comes to these things, you know. So don't be afraid to like blacken a lot of big areas that are like, you know, going to hide some of the details." And the thing is with those two, you learn over time that you can be it can be a bit forgiving in a way, because like if this little weird shaped piece on Megatron's clavicle is a few inches over this way, or you forget this little ball joint thing here, you know, it's like no one's really going to notice that as long as you have the overall look of it more or less right. So I don't know. I mean, it for sure was like a bit intimidating, but it did get to a point where I could almost draw. In fact, I could draw a movie Megatron from memory.
Wow.
And I was like, I felt like maybe I should get like, I don't know, sent to Arkham Asylum or something, because like I just this isn't normal. This shouldn't be a normal thing.
Well, and that's a good point though, that because of, I guess, the more involved biology, like even watching the movies, as those robots move around, things do move around more, and it's more kinetic. It doesn't feel as restrictive as the blockier, you know, G1 type stuff.
In some ways, the G1 stuff is still the most challenging thing for me to do, because like if I do a commission for somebody or draw them on a page or something, it's hard to like draw like just a block and give it good texture, and like it's almost like too simple to look dynamic on a page.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have to find ways to, and I think that like the new Skybound stuff is really leaning more towards like the energetic, like scratchy kind of loose kind of thing. And it reminds me a lot of what EJ Sue did in the beginning of IDW Comics. Like
Yes.
if you look at his early issues, I see a lot of influence on the newer Skybound stuff myself. I don't know if that's, you know, direct or not. I don't know if they looked at his stuff or not, but like I see similarities for sure for what he did.
Well, and for you to have come in to the IDW, because you know, and it's wild to say this, but there are probably people watching and listening right now who weren't around for the IDW Transformers and GI Joe comics, or don't have as much awareness, or whatever the case is.
Sure.
But those were some, like, for people our age anyway, those were some massive blockbuster comics at the time. Like those were exciting because they weren't Marvel and DC, but they were telling these incredible stories from franchises that we loved in a way that really, and look, I've you know, along the way, like Dreamwave and with Transformers, and then Devil's Due with GI Joe, like I enjoyed all of that stuff. But when IDW got a hold of those, it really did. Well, it was similar to how it feels with Skybound now, where it's like electric and exciting, and it's this new like, wow, they're really invested in these things,
Yeah.
and that's how it felt with IDW. So for you to have come in the middle of that uh, sort of really big, exciting moment of the franchise, like, did you feel that like,
Oh,
oh,
sure. Like,
this is a like you kind of came into a superstar thing going on?
yeah, it's funny because like I remember, like I said, I'd fallen out of like the fandom and stuff a bit, and what actually got me back into Transformers was I read probably around 2005. I read that like Paramount had hired Michael Bay to make a live action movie, and they were gonna roughly like base it on G1. So that got me like, wow, what's been going on with Transformers? You know, because I hadn't bought anything since probably G2, and so I just started reading like the wikis and the fan sites and everything, and I got back into it like really quick and really like in the 90s I had sold a lot of my Transformers. My girlfriend and I went to a flea market and set up a table, and I sold a lot of my 80s Transformers, being like, no one's ever going to care about this again. I'm going to go buy these new Power of the Force Star Wars figures that are going to be worth a
Yeah,
fortune, you know.
been there,
And
been there.
I'm like, nobody's going to care about this again. Little did I know what my future career would be. But so then I started like recollecting. um you know, I'd buy like the reissue kind of stuff that I liked, that was like the Takara re-releases that have like the original weapons and stuff. I didn't like so much like the Toys R Us ones that would have like a black gun instead of a silver gun and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But so the more authentic reissues I was getting, I'd get on eBay and try to like recollect the stuff that I had gotten rid of, and that kind of got me collecting again too. And then I'm sorry, I lost a little trail of my thought here, but what was your question?
Well, it just
Oh,
about
coming
being
in when
in
it
that
was
dynamic era of Transformers with
right.
IDW.
So that, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, it's like I started getting back into the fandom right around the time that IDW was just kicking off. You know, around 2005, 2006. And I was reading all those things like Infiltration and Devastation and all that. So yeah, but it wasn't until like 2008 that I really kind of started putting myself out there and got into drawing and stuff again. I don't know. Maybe it was like 2006, 7-ish. I remember like I wasn't there when it first came out, but it wasn't long after IDW started coming out that I was really getting into it. So like it's a little weird because I didn't really get to take part in that until like 2012, because I had been doing movie books for a few years, and that always felt a little bit like I'm almost there but not quite. Like, you
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah.
I enjoyed it. I got to start a working relationship with John Barber, who was the writer on Foundation, and we're still working together now. But like, and I got my foot in the door in comics and stuff, but I never even felt comfortable going to like do convention appearances until I started working on the G1 stuff. Like when I did the movie stuff, I felt like I was kind of like I had like, I don't know if it was like imposter syndrome. I just didn't feel like I was official yet. Like I felt like no one's going to care about me. They're going to be like, "What are you doing here?" You know. So, but yeah, like, so I didn't quite have that feeling of like, yeah, I'm in it. Um, I had a few close calls, like San Diego Comic Con one year. They announced me on a like Casey Collar had just done Spotlight Blur, and he was getting in like at the same time I was, and they announced me on a Spotlight Cosmos, and without even me knowing, there was just a big Transformers panel, and they announced me as the artist, and that was a complete surprise. But then the book never came out,
Oh
so I had
man.
close calls like that. But it never quite worked out until they did the two ongoings, More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise, and then they brought me on for that. So that was finally my chance to dive in.
Well, and it's funny with the movie stuff. Well, even in a general sense, a lot of licensed stuff. I think people are better about it now than they used to be. They did used to be kind of a like, oh, you're working on a licensed comic, but
Mm-hmm.
everything is a licensed comic, and
Right?
for me, that's just an opportunity for storytelling that is going to reach a broader audience. Like if you're working on Star Wars comics or you're working on GI Joe or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like it's I love all kinds of storytelling. I want to see original stuff. I want to see people take characters that I know and do different things with them. I want to
Hmm.
see, like, it's all about storytelling. I don't care what the format is. I don't care what
Yep,
the comic
me
is.
too.
And with the movie stuff, oftentimes, I was going to say sometimes, oftentimes the movie tie-in comics are better than the movies are.
And it's hard for me to say because I worked on it, but I kind
Sure.
of feel the same. Like what I was saying earlier doesn't mean that we didn't put all we could into it. I mean,
Of course.
we approach them as like seriously as we could, and I've always felt that any version of Transformers can be like as good of a sci-fi property as any other sci-fi. You know what I mean? Like it's just it depends on who's writing it and drawing it and what they're putting into it. You know, it's kind of like when you go to school, like you do as well as you put into it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like yeah.
Yeah, and that's there are no real limits. Like the every franchise, every idea, every concept is as versatile as the creators are. Like it's not about we've talked about this a couple of times on the show. Superman always comes up as like, oh, he's too overpowered, he's
Hmm.
boring. He's not boring. He's as great as the writer, as the creators make him.
I
Like
agree.
it's not about what you're doing; it's about the stories you're telling.
Yep.
Anyway,
And like I
I'll
don't
get off my
feel
soapbox.
no, I completely agree there. And I don't like you were saying too. I don't even feel like the Marvel stuff or Superman or Batman or the Avengers. None of that is any less licensed now than like Transformers or GI Joe.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
all most people come to that now through movies and TV shows, and then
Mhm.
if they want to dive more into the characters, they can go to the comic books. But it's almost like the comics are there to support the license anyway now. You know?
Well, and I think that's part of why the attitude has changed, because I think people are definitely embracing let's just say comics based on toys or whatever in a
Hmm.
very different way than they used to. Um, and so let's talk about one of the really biggest legacies that you've been a part of. And I guess the reason that we met in the first place, and that is Larry Hama's GI Joe Real American Hero,
Hmm.
that you ended up working on with a huge legacy already behind it by the time
Right.
you got there, and now it has a continuing legacy beyond what we thought might be the end back then. Going into that, and you said GI Joe was kind of your first franchise love.
Hmm.
uh what was that feeling like, tackling something that was that personally epic to you?
Well, pretty huge. I mean, I was lucky enough over the years, like while I was working on Transformers, IDW kept me busy too. Like, hey, do you want to do a cover for this Mask issue or this ROM or GI Joe? So I did a few like GI Joe covers and things here and there, and I was always bugging them to, give me a chance on a book and a GI Joe book. And then I think what happened was they relaunched, in 2019 they relaunched the Transformers stuff, and they wanted to bring in new creators. Like it wasn't like they were just shutting us completely out, but they wanted to focus more on some new creators. So I don't know. I was talking to some of the editors at IDW, and I'm like, hey, could I maybe get a shot on this, on that? So that led to me doing GI Joe and Star Wars there a bit too. So one day I just got an email from Tom, Tom, the editor, Tom Waltz, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do a 5-issue arc on GI Joe?" And I'm like, "Yes," So of course, no hesitation. He's like, "We're bringing in some new characters." Larry's like feeling like introducing new characters. It's going to focus on this character Sherlock. So I did that 5-issue arc, and I was pretty happy with it. Everybody seemed pretty happy with it. From what I'm told, it sold out, which is kind of I laugh now because like at the time when I worked on Transformers, Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye were like the two highest selling books at IDW
Yeah.
for a while. And then when I got on GI Joe, like my issue sold out. So that was always kind of like a nice like feel good bragging point kind of thing. And now I look at like what Skybound's doing, and it's like, wow, that was nothing. You know,
Well,
I
but
kind of it keeps me humble. But
at the time, though, because I mean, look, Skybound is launch. While I'm really enjoying the creativity of the Energon universe, and the stories are fantastic, you also have to add in how cleverly Skybound marketed the whole thing.
yeah,
They made, by sheer force of will, they turned it into the comics event of the year that it
sure.
launched.
It reminds me of like when Dreamwave put out theirs and like sold
Yes.
ridiculous amounts
Mhm.
and stuff. But
And so at the point you were working on Joe, it was, G.I. Joe Real American Hero, that comic is always going to sell.
mhm,
Uh, but you weren't coming into some big event,
right.
some big and I remember those issues hitting, and again it felt sort of electric. There was something and I don't know if it's because it was nearing the end. I don't know if it's because the new characters. It just felt like there was a bit of a creative surge there, and I do remember those being kind of a big deal within what was going on at the time. So
And
that to hear that they sold out doesn't surprise me at all.
um, but to answer your other question, yeah, that was a really, really huge thing for me. I mean, professionally, that was probably one of my like most rewarding years because I got brought on to do GI Joe, and then I also got the chance to do some Star Wars at IDW. So those are two things I'd always wanted to work on in comics. So yeah, that was huge because like A Real American Hero is one of the first comics that I read as a kid, and to be working on that same continuity all those years later as an adult, um, even the timing of it, like um, I remember thinking, "Oh wow, the 40th anniversary is coming up! Isn't that amazing?" And I was like, "It would be great to like do something for it, to take part in some kind of anniversary." So then when they did that silent interlude, kind of like it's almost like a cover album where
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
like did their version of a
It's
page.
it's fantastic.
So I got to take part in that, and that was like perfect. It was just like chef's kiss or whatever they say. But no,
Yeah,
it was great. And then after my 5 issue arc ended, um, I kind of stayed on as the regular artist, except for when they were losing the license. They're like they wanted to get to 300, of course, and
yeah,
Hasbro's like, "Oh, you can do it, but you have to get it out by like this date, and you have to like, they gave us a very limited time, so different issues were getting handed off to different artists and stuff.
yeah.
So like, I think I did 7 issues in total, and then of course the license went to Skybound. So I had my little spark of a moment there for a little while.
Hey, it could come back around. You never know.
Hopefully.
Well, and especially with some of the stuff they're doing now that we were just talking on Audible Interlude the other day, they're doing those silent missions to celebrate Silent Interlude, where they've got different artists handling stories. So they're getting more people into the mix. It feels like.
Hmm.
So
And
I'm
and some people like I know like EJ Sue's doing covers now and stuff too. So like they're starting to kind of dip their toes in the
yeah,
idea of bringing in creators. But everyone I know who's worked on a lot of IDW stuff who reached out to them was told like, hey, nothing personal. It's nothing against you. Use we're trying to avoid
yeah,
recycling the
right,
old creators and use our own
right,
creators to make our mark on it. And but I mean, so at some point, who knows? Maybe
sure.
enough time will pass that they'll bring in some of the old guys and
So
girls.
knowing you were going into a situation with where new characters were going to be introduced, what did and I always hate these questions of how did you feel when this happened, because people don't always remember or don't always have specific feelings, but it is interesting to think about as a creator, knowing you're going to be handling like, okay, this is something new being introduced into the legacy of GI Joe. Again, I'm sure there was a little bit of intimidation, but how exciting was it knowing you're going to have a hand in the first presentation to the fans?
That's a very exciting thing too. Like I said, the first arc that I did was really focused on introducing Sherlock and her backstory and stuff. And it's like Larry had sent like a rough sketch of her in like combat fatigues and but then I got to design what she looked like as a Joe costume. So that was really cool, and like just seeing her continue on a bit. Like I haven't, I'm not completely up to date on Skybound, so I don't know how much they've used her or not used her, but I have seen her on like covers and things. So it's cool seeing that she's still around. And then other characters like Malto from he's a Filipino character, I
Yes.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't do the first issue with him, but I did a few issues where he was kind of getting introduced and stuff. And there was so much love from like, there's a huge Filipino fandom for GI Joe, and got a lot of like appreciation from people there having that character in there. So yeah, it's generally been good feedback too. Every once in a while, I'll do like a signing or a convention thing, and someone will come up and complain about new characters and how they should just stick to the old characters, and that's not really my take on it. I'm like, you got to keep it fresh, and especially if someone like Larry's the creator and he wants to bring in new ideas and new characters, it's like he should be able to do that. But I don't know. For me, it keeps it fresh, introduces it to a new audience, and like it's exciting. So for me, it's been all good.
Well, and at some point, I mean, you have to introduce new relationships, new dynamics, whatever. And also, at some point, everybody was a new character.
Yeah. Right.
Like if you go back through the history of the Joe comic, we start off with, those original 1982 Joes. And for over the course of 40 years, we're introducing new characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, some forum or something not too long ago, I saw someone complaining about when like Duke and Roblox show up in like issue 23 or 24. They're like, what do we need them for? We had Hawk and we had this. And it's like, really? Like that was 40 years ago and you're still like worked up about it? Like
people are still mad about Duke. And what's funny is a lot of times what happens is like somebody will read an interview from Larry Hama from like 1988 or 9 or something like that, where he says, I wasn't crazy about Duke. And he's literally maybe just saying having to introduce him or at first or whatever the case may be. But because someone's a devoted G.I. Joe fan, because they love Larry's work so much, they take that quote to heart and make it part of their persona. Mm-hmm. I also hate Duke,
For sure.
Maybe that wasn't even the intent with the original quote.
I'm sure that kind of stuff happens too, especially if it's like you said, like a very like a true luminary creator that people. It's almost like being a fan of like a football team or something where you're like, that's my guy, like I'm going to go with what he says, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing too. Just real quick, another thing that was a really like big honor for me was the early issues of Joe. I always loved like the backstory stuff from Vietnam with like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and all that stuff was like great for me. So I got to do the one issue that was like a spotlight Storm Shadow almost, where they went back to those issues and put a little more meat on the bone. And apparently that was a pretty personal story for Larry, like dealing with people that he's lost in the war and like people he knew died and stuff. So apparently that's kind of like a favorite issue of his. He even kind of like we brought that up in the panel we did at Dragon Con, and he kind of like came. He seemed to feel that way after based on what he said after the panel, but to me personally. But also, I think it was picked for like one of the last things IDW put out was a trade of like some of his favorite G.I. Joe stories, I think, and that was in there. So that was really nice.
Well, and that, going back to the origins of Stalker, Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, I remember being however young I was when I was reading those comics, because I would have been. It seems crazy to think I was 8 years old reading comics about Vietnam, but that's pretty much what would have been going on.
Yeah.
And I knew that my dad was in Vietnam. I knew that it was a real thing. I knew that it was a serious thing. So having these toys because part of the whole reason I was as into G.I. Joe as I was, you mentioned seeing them in the store, and we've talked time and time again about how those of us who were kids when it came out, there was nothing else like that packaging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
With that explosion on the card. Yep. Like it looked so awesome.
Very eye-catching, yeah.
So the first ones I got were, we were in a drugstore. I was in a drugstore with my mom, and back behind the pharmacy, or back at the pharmacy, they had one of those wire spinner racks with the pegs on it and Joe figures.
Like a comic spinner.
Yeah. Very similar to that, except just with figures on it. So I got those, and my dad, who very serious, uptight would not be unkind to say about him, military lieutenant colonel type fella, but those early Joes, looking as reality based as they were, and then as the vehicles started coming out, he got really invested with, oh well, this looks an awful lot like this actual real world plane or Jeep or
Hmm.
whatever. So he kind of got into GI Joe in that way. Like that was an early bonding thing for us, is
Yeah.
both of us like enjoying. Matter of fact, I even remember him bringing the Sky Striker home like completely unprompted on his way home from work one day. He had, I don't know where he stopped, probably Service Merchandise, if you remember that.
I do. We didn't have it in our area, but I think if we take a trip down to like Georgia or something to visit my aunt,
Yeah.
we'd pass them and things like that. Yeah.
But I remember him bringing that home and opening it and going through how similar it was. You know, it was just,
Yep.
it was, that was great. And I now have forgotten the point of what I was talking about, but with GI Joe, it's that knowing that this fun toy that I had was rooted in something that was very real and that had that connection to my dad,
Yeah.
made is part of what made my fandom so much more serious, is seeing that in those comics, like, oh my gosh, these fantastical characters. Because the comics, as much as anybody wants to call them like gritty and real, they were still essentially superhero stories, which is great.
Yeah.
But seeing them have that basis in reality really gave it a different feel from anything else that I was enjoying at the time. Like Masters of the Universe, nothing else had quite that impact.
Yeah. Like the real world influence of it, like really made it grounded. Like the, that 2-issue arc early on, like I think it was 6 and 7 or something, where the October Guard first gets introduced. Like there's this huge epic. It's almost like Ditko or Kirby or something. This double page spread of like the all-terrain vehicle thing they were riding and going over this cavern, and
Yes.
jeeps ramping off the side, and everybody's like flying out and shooting, and like it felt very like fantasy comic sci-fi superhero-y. But also the other side of GI Joe is, like you said, like I'll go to the National Air and Space Museum, and there'll be a F-14 Tomcat sitting there, and I'm like, oh, it's a Sky Striker.
Yeah.
That's what I think of. That's what I'm like. But it's also so much of like I mentioned the mobile missile system earlier, which is based on like a real system that they would have used like in Vietnam. And like when I draw like Roadblock or Rock and Roll with a Machine Gun, it's going to be like an M60 or something that would have been used, in like Vietnam. So like a lot of that stuff, a lot of their gear, when Joe came out, Vietnam hadn't ended that long ago.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that was all pretty contemporary stuff. And but yeah, I don't know if I'm kind of trailing off here, but like,
no, that's what we do. We go down roads and figure out where the conversation is going to go
mm-hmm.
with whatever we're talking about. That's what I
but
enjoy.
yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like I didn't, not in my immediate family. Like my parents were of the Vietnam era too, but they weren't in the war itself. I had aunts and uncles and stuff, so I didn't have that direct connection. Like the closest I could say I have, I guess, is I grew up pretty much across the street from the U.S. Army War College, and so like everybody in my school was coming through. Their parents were like, going to school there, and there was some sort of officer that was going to school there. And like now too, they have a big outdoor, like a park you can go running through, and they have a lot of vehicles on display. A lot of ones from the Vietnam era, and I keep meaning to go like take photos there and post them on like some GI Joe groups,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
so many of those vehicles, I'm like, oh, that's pretty much the Mobat. That's the, that's this, that's that. It's like so many of them. Like they even have ones that have like Tiger Force striping on them and stuff. And but anyway, so when I see things like that, my direct connection is GI Joe. I think of like, oh, that's that vehicle, that's this vehicle, that's this branded vehicle. But
well, and even though people may not have a direct connection, if you grew up in the 80s, you do, though, because
yeah,
all of media was suffused with the after effects of Vietnam. If you
yep,
look at like the A-Team and Rambo and like all the Commando, like
MASH, that was more
everything.
Korea, but still, like it had that
Yeah.
era, that
Yeah, because
Cold
when
War
I was
era.
a kid watching MASH, all I knew was like, look, it's more army people,
Mm-hmm.
like GI Joe. Like, so in the 80s, it was like everybody had a direct connection to it in a way,
Yeah,
because it was all the fallout of that. Even like Magnum PI. Magnum
yeah.
PI had some Vietnam stories in it.
It was like
So
Airwolf, and then you had like
yeah.
Bond movies at the time were very Cold War ish,
Mm-hmm.
like. But yeah,
Man, if all the toy manufacturers out there, I see you're a collector, and we're going to talk about a couple of those things in just a minute. But everybody out there making toys, somebody please do a good Airwolf. I need an Airwolf toy so badly?
A small, I know, like I don't know if it ever came
A
out, but
smaller company did one a few years ago, and it didn't turn out great, from
yeah, I
what
was
I
going to say
hear.
there's a brief period where they're trying to bring it back. Like a friend of mine was an editor at a small comic book company, and they were talking about like trying to like to me and other people about maybe coming in and trying to get some artists, some established artists on it and
Oh
stuff.
man, yeah.
But I don't know if it ever happened. I don't know if it. I don't remember if it ever came about. And I
Yeah,
know
I'm
at the
trying to
time
think.
that was around the time I think they put out that toy of it.
I would love to see a revival of. Well, there's a lot of stuff because there's so much creative potential in a lot of things, and I think it's just the matter of the right vision to
Mm-hmm.
bring it forward. It
Speak.
can't be mired in what it was. There's got to be a new take, but it's got to be good.
Yeah. Yep. It's funny, like looking even at the package behind you, the Revolution. Like so many, even like Visionaries and stuff like that were like huge for me. I was the weird kid who got every single Visionaries toy, including like the big vehicles and stuff. And most people don't even seem to remember it. But
Oh, I loved it. Well, okay. So talking about visionaries, you got to remember that era in the '80s or that period in the '80s where holograms were like
oh yeah,
those National Geographic covers came out. The one with
yep.
the skull on it. What was it?
And
There was a
so many
skull.
comic book covers, and
Oh yeah. Oh
collecting
yeah.
cards, trading cards, and
hmm
mhm.
Oh yeah. Actually, I'm glad you bring up trading cards because that's something I wanted to ask you about. You've done some work on trading cards. Is that correct?
um, and collectible card game stuff like Magic and stuff now too. Yeah.
What what is that process like? Because that's a whole other, when you're working in comics, you're telling stories, and I guess to a certain extent with collectible card games, there's probably a narrative there as well. But I would imagine the creative direction is different on those things. How does that break down? Because I've never talked to anybody who's worked on cards like that before.
Um, well, the very first stuff. In fact, one of the earliest like professional jobs I did was after I got into comics. Another artist I knew did art for tops for Star Wars cards, and kind of hooked me up doing like sketch cards. I didn't do actual like illustrated cards, but
Yeah.
I did sketch cards for tops, and that was fun to do. And then I did some other things like what was it, like Witchblade, Conan kind of stuff, and like um, I did those off and on for a while, and then they just, to be perfectly honest, they don't pay that well. Like you have to do a lot to make any money, and to make it look nice, you have to spend time on it. But um, it it wasn't all that worth it. But then over time, what else did I do card wise? Okay, so a few years back, they had the Wizards of the Coast put out a Transformers collectible card game, and
Mm.
they hired me to do some art for that. And then um, that led into doing some Magic crossover Transformers ones, and then that
Oh,
led,
I didn't even know that was a thing.
yeah, oh yeah, that really surprised me. They're like, oh, they're going to be for Magic. I'm like, wait, what? Like Transformers Magic the Gathering cards? And then that was when they were first starting. Now they've done like Lord of the Rings, and they're doing a Marvel one, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. A few I've done that I can't talk about. But anyway, so as far as the art direction, it's just funny because like I'll get emails out of the blue from some art director I may or may not know, and they'll say, do you want to work on this card set? It's like, sure. They're like, here's the rate, here's what the subject's going to be. Um, if you say yes, how many cards can you do? You tell them how many you can reasonably do in that time frame, and then they'll come back with the email. And it's really nice because like it's very very detailed. Like it'll have like the name of the card, description of the card, and what colors it's associated with for Magic and stuff. Um, and it's all laid out, very informative. They'll send along some references and stuff. And then you have a nice, in my opinion, a nice amount of time, like a few weeks or months to get the card done, and then you know they'll want to see some sketches first and approve them, and then once that comes back, then you're kind of free to just go about it. And I've had very few changes on Magic cards, to be honest. Most stuff's been approved with like one or two little tweaks, but they've been very, in my experience, very, very easy to work with.
I've always been interested in that process because thematically there has to be a structure to like a set. And I look, I don't totally know how that all works, but I am aware that they put out like, here's a theme to this set and they share these qualities. It's just interesting to me to think about all these different artists contributing to this thing that has to have this feel to it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too because I also do art for Renegade Studios. Now puts out a Transformers GI Joe trading card game, and I do art for that. And they'll hire me and a lot of other like established artists from Transformers and GI Joe to do new art for like specific cards. But then I'll get comps in the mail, packs and things. We'll open them up, and not only is it that art, but then they'll use a lot of art like from comic books that I might have worked on or other people I know worked on. So I'll message people, be like, "Hey, do you know your art's in this?" And like they're not even aware of it, because they don't play the game. So, but yeah, it's for things like that. It's a lot of it's a mix of new art and existing Hasbro, art. Yeah.
So you mentioned the Revolution box behind me, which I put there for a reason because you had a hand in several of the things tied into that.
Yeah.
And at the time, I can't even tell you how excited. That's one of the reasons, we've talked about Skybound a lot, but that's one of the reasons the Energon universe is so exciting is it has already brought Transformers, G.I. Joe, and a couple other things together. And there is still hope. Like, I want Mask. I want Visionaries. I want everything that
Micronauts.
Revolution was going to be. Well, to an extent was. It just didn't get as much traction as I think we were all hoping it would at the time.
Yeah.
But what was around IDW? What was the feel when this was going on? Like, what was I would imagine most everybody working on it was fans and were excited to be putting those things together in a way that made sense.
Yeah, I think it was pretty exciting because like I grew up with ROM and Micronauts and all that stuff, so getting to use those characters and like one of my dream project was always to do a GI Joe Transformers crossover, which probably wouldn't be surprising based on what I'm into. But I would love to do a Transformers Star Wars crossover. I have ideas, but I don't know if that would ever happen. But anyway,
hey, they did toys.
Yeah, but that is true. You never know. You never know. So I always wanted to do a Transformers GI Joe crossover. So once we started bringing those universes together, getting to like use GI Joe characters in our books was very exciting. It was very fun. And then that led into me doing like some Micronaut stuff, some Mask stuff, all of which I grew up with. I remember elementary school. I traded like a lot of 1984 and 85 Transformers minicons and small figures for like one or two Mask vehicles. And I don't know about you, but personally, I feel like Transformers has remained a much bigger thing than Mask, and I kind of regret that now. So I don't know. I would have had a much bigger Transformers collection as an adult, I think, if I hadn't sold or traded away all my Transformers stuff.
Well, here's what I've run into with me personally. Well, first of all, my Mask story. So loved. Everybody loved Mask because it was kind of GI Joe and Transformers put together a bit. And what happened, I kind of never really grew out of toys. Like I always, even during like middle school and high school, I was still on the down low, still collecting toys. And when one of my friends, who he was one of the guys, you'd go over to his house and set everything up, sit down, have battles or whatever. But then he got more into sports, more into whatever else, didn't care about his toys anymore. And I was over there one day hanging out. And I was like, man, all your Mask stuff has been like, what are you doing? And he's like, I don't really care about that stuff anymore. You want it? And dude, I'm talking Boulder Hill,
wow,
Rhino, everything. Maybe not everything, but a big giant cardboard box of Mask stuff. And I think because I rode my bike over to his house. And I want to say maybe I stuck like the Rhino and what, because I had zero Mask. Because my parents were like, I had a few things here and there, but in general, they were like, look, you got to have one thing. G.I. Joe's your one thing.
Yeah.
We're not getting you everything in the world. So somehow I got a couple of things back to the house. and then told my mom, I was like, hey, Ryan told me I could have all of his mask stuff. Can we take the van over there and get it all? And she was like, he can't just give you all of his toys. And I was like, no, he doesn't care. He's playing soccer now. He doesn't want them. And
Like, Mom, don't ruin this for me.
right. And she drove me back down there and had to go in the house and like talk to Ryan's dad, like, look, here's what's going on. I don't think it's, I want to make sure. And he's like, I don't care. Take it. So this giant box
Nice.
goes back to the house. And of course, over the years, I can't even remember what happened to that stuff. But I wish I had kept the mask stuff more than the Transformers stuff that I had, which again, I didn't have a ton of Transformers. But I think, we go through phases where we're more and less excited about certain things. I think with Transformers and those G1 toys, part of the reason when we go through a lull with those, they seem less important is because the only thing they did was transform. Like, they weren't really, they were cool cars. They weren't really good action figures.
No, they were a brick. Maybe if you're lucky, they could go like this.
Yeah. So I think that's why so many of us didn't feel bad about getting rid of them when we did get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, when I would, like you were saying, talking about, dude, every few years I get pulled back into Transformers and it infuriates me. The last time they got me was when gosh, I don't know what year it was, but they went back to G1 designs, but with tons of articulation and robot mode. And man, they got me because the vehicle mode looked almost exactly like, maybe not quite as clean as the originals, but still like jazz looked like jazz.
Are you talking about the Masterpiece or the Generations one?
No, it would be the Generation stuff. Yeah. It would be the Generation stuff.
I was kind of the same with that. Yeah.
Oh, they got me for a while, and then it finally got to a point where I was like, wait, what am I doing? I don't collect Transformers.
No, but I have those moments too. Like I never collected. Like I always limited myself to like Transformers and G.I. Joe. But then, I don't know, a year or so ago, like I had a pet die, and my wife was away visiting her family and stuff. So I was like, I did a little retail therapy and started buying some I saw some clearance like Star Wars Black Series figures, and like, oh, okay, I guess now I'm collecting this. Like, I'm like, but it's hard to like limit yourself to just one.
I can't, like if I start collecting something, I cannot be. Matter of fact, I just boxed up all my Black Series stuff last year because I'm a vintage collection guy. Like I started with the small Star Wars figures. I never stopped collecting those. Like I went through Power of the Force. I went through like all the Clone Wars. Like I never stopped getting the 3 3/4 inch Star Wars stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And last year I was like, I got to stop with these Black Series figures and just focus on the little guys because it's nuts over here.
Well, I got really into like classified, G.I. Joe classified too. So
and that's the thing is everything is that 1/12 scale now.
Yeah.
So it's very really convenient.
We can talk about what I have here, but I focused on like the original Joe toys, but then I got into classified, so now I have both.
Yeah, well, and that's what with G.I. Joe. It's more ridiculous because I've got basically anything G.I. Joe I buy. I can't help it. I've got the Super 7 stuff. I've got the vintage, the classified.
See, I've held off on that. Like I haven't gone that far. I just stick to the classified and the original ones. But
every iteration of G.I. Joe is interesting in some way to me. Even like Extreme and stuff. Where actually this year is the anniversary. We haven't announced this yet. Even this year's the anniversary of Extreme. Which is a much maligned branch of G.I. Joe, but we're going to do a couple of special things this year focusing on Extreme because it's part of G.I. Joe. Whether you like it or not, it's part of the history.
Yeah, that was one I never got into. That or like Sigma 6, whatever, like.
I remember when Extreme came out and I bought a couple just because it was G.I. Joe and I was like, this is terrible. I can't deal. And they were influenced by the stuff that was going on with toys at the time, like these dynamic, limited articulation, heavily detailed and sculpted figures, like that's what was happening. So I get it, But yeah, Sigma 6, I bought like one of those, and I was like, this is an incredible toy, but this is not something I want to collect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see. So you've got a tactical battle platform up there, one of the great pieces of G.I. Joe history.
Mm-hmm.
But then underneath it, I believe that's a Castle Grayskull.
No, it's actually classified figures.
Is it? I've been okay. So I've, from my view, and I hope that the viewers watching this can understand what I'm looking at. It looks like, because there's a darker background, and then there's a light colored figure. I've this whole time I've been looking at it and seeing the shape of a Castle Grayskull with
Okay.
Extendar on in the front of it.
Oh wow. Nope,
So
that's
that's all
the
classified.
Storm
Okay.
Shadow. That's a new Storm Shadow.
Yes.
And then the shelf above it is the Vamp, and there's like Duke and Scarlet and Stalker, and kind of like the earlier Joes I have up top there, and then as it goes down, the newer ones.
That's I tried to group. I've got the originals that have come out grouped together.
Yeah.
That Storm Shadow, I ended up really liking it, but I did cut the scabbards off of his belt.
Yeah, I did not like it when I first saw it. Like I didn't like the black belt thing hanging down. Like it just, I don't know. I wish they would have stuck more with just, I don't know, like this guy. Like he's
Yes.
Him, by the way, that figure and this figure are probably still my two favorite 80s toy figures. Snake Eyes.
And, I mean, they're chef's kiss, those two.
Yep. But as far as the classified, what I really want, like, I wish now they'd dive into like Short Fuse and Flash and Grand Slam and characters like that, you know, because like they've already done in Zap. I guess they haven't done Zap. They've done, you know, Grunt and Rock and Roll, and I love the Duke and Scarlet. I think they look great. The retro ones.
That Scarlet is one of the best action figures I have ever bought. My only complaint is that they put that hole in her waist for the belt to fit into. That belt with the quiver on it that she's got.
Yeah.
There's a hole in the action, like in the figure, then there's a little peg in the belt that plugs into the hole.
Yeah, I'm not sure I remembered that. I pretty much just set her up and put her there. I just thought,
and
I think she looks great.
And that's me being ridiculously nitpicky because the sculpting on that figure is incredible. Proportionally, like the tendency in action figure lines is to make women teeny tiny.
Yeah.
And she actually has like a physique. It's
and
great
like
figure.
When they first started the classified, they brought him out looking more like sci-fi, and they redesigned her look, you know, and like the Duke and stuff. I wasn't really into classified until I think they brought out like what was it, like one of the versions of Roadblock or something. I think it was.
Was it
like
the
now
heavy
these are starting
artillery Roadblock?
Yeah, it's like these are starting to look more like they should be looking now, you know.
Yeah.
And then Major Blood was an early one too. Like I thought he looked pretty good, so that kind of got me into it. But anyway, the tactical battle platform is a very similar story to what you were talking about earlier. My older brother had a friend who was into G.I. Joe for a while, and he hadn't played with them very much, and a lot of my early ones were broken by that point.
Yeah.
So I had a paper route, so I bought them off of him really cheap, and I got that. I got another like a Rattler, the G.I. Joe base, like the Ferret, like a whole bunch of stuff. Some stuff I never had, some stuff I had broken. So a couple of years ago, when I got back into G.I. Joe in a big way, my parents moved out of their house, and they're like, you got to get rid of the stuff that's in the attic. So I pulled down like all the old boxes and stuff and went through it and found I still had a pretty big G.I. Joe collection. And I'm like, I couldn't remember. I'm like, why do I have two Rattlers? Why do I have two G.I. Joe bases? Why do I have two tactical battle platforms? And I was able to like combine them and make like one good one out of both of those, you know, and then sell off the parts and stuff. So I don't remember if that's my original or the one that I got from him, but some parts are probably original.
Oh, that's amazing. So where was your parents' house?
In Pennsylvania. So
I'm so jealous.
Why?
Because my parents' house is here in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
All of my Joe stuff also up in the attic. The only problem is attics in Georgia get to like 120 degrees in the summer.
Yeah.
And everything just that ABS plastic just gets brittle and just shatters. And nothing. I say nothing survived. I've got a few pieces from when I was a kid. But yeah, that was brutal. And it was on me
Well,
because
like,
there was a point where I could have said, I need to get that stuff out of the attic, put it somewhere else, do something with it. But I didn't care about it at the time.
hmm well, can you see up here? Okay, wait, up there. I have like Destro on his Iron Grenadier stuff, and then I have
Yes.
the Rage and the Bug and some of the later. Like I usually like the more realistic stuff, but there's certain toys towards the end of the run that I really liked, like the Rage. The Bug was like a play set, and then I have a bunch of hisses on the first shelf there, different types of hiss tanks and stuff. I always liked hiss tanks.
Do you remember the last stuff you got like when you were a kid? Because you showed that Storm Shadow version 2, and I remember the last 2 figures I got, because I usually say I stopped collecting in 87.
Okay.
But the last 2 figures I got were that Storm Shadow and Hit and Run that were both 88
Oh, Hit
figures.
and Run's great. Yeah.
Hit and Run is awesome. And I remember pretty much being done with G.I. Joe, but then seeing those in the store and being like, oh my gosh, those are so cool.
hmm
And even my mom saying, you don't play with your G.I. Joes anymore, but me just being like, I have to have these. And those being the last 2. Do you remember like anything like that?
I do remember I was into it like well after I got out of Transformers. So, like I said, I had a paper route in high school and like middle school and getting into high school, and I was still buying like GI Joe toys with my paper route money until probably about 91 or 92, until I started, realizing I should be into girls and stuff. And then, but I do even remember one moment where I was at like a Kmart and I was looking through the GI Joe displays of the carded figures, and this one kid from school kind of like walked by and like made fun of me a bit, and he's like, "Oh, you're still buying this stuff?" And like he was trying to act all cool. And then like I saw like at a convention not too long ago, like he walks up to me and I didn't know who he was, and he's like, "Oh, I'm still really into all this stuff." He's like, "I always was," and all this stuff. It's like, really? Okay, okay. Um,
I wish I had stuck with Joe. I moved from Joe to Ninja Turtles.
oh,
That was
I was into
my
that too for a while.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know how it is. You go in and out of it. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there were a few years in the '80s where I probably didn't get much Joe stuff, and I got Turtles instead. But then I got back into Joe, and like, as far as my last one, do you know who Rampart is?
Yeah. Yeah.
It might have been him or Big Ben. I was like those guys, the ones that look kind of believable. Oh, Blizzard might have been one of my last ones.
Oh
The
yeah,
snow
yeah.
guy. I
Yeah.
always thought he's a great figure. He comes with so much stuff. He's
He's
kind of
got
like the snow
tons of
serpent with
stuff.
all the accessories.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I say I wish I had stuck with Joe, but at the same time, for me, for many, many years, my original Joe fandom ended around 87, 88. And now though, because I didn't get back into Joe until 97 when they did the Toys R Us
hmm
exclusive stuff, when the O-rings came back. But now I'm getting to rediscover all that stuff, like the Bug and Iron Grenadiers and all the stuff that came out after I got out.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun because for years I didn't like some of the crazier stuff. I didn't like some of the
Yeah.
neon color stuff. But
Exactly.
now
Yeah.
I want cool toys. Like I'm not as concerned about, does this look like a GI Joe thing that I would have liked when I was 12? Now I just want it to be a cool looking toy.
Yeah.
So I get something
I get
like
that.
here we go. I get something like that,
Yep.
like that Flint from Eco Warriors, and I'm
Eco
like,
War. Yep.
great, this is awesome. This is a fun toy. Like I'm thrilled. So it's been fun, kind of discovering that stuff and having something to go back
Yeah, I
to.
haven't gotten into that era of this stuff. I kind of fell out by like 91 or 92. I'm kind of looking around and seeing like I still kind of stick to like the 82 to 90, 91-ish kind
Yeah.
of years that I collect. Like recently, I was at one of those stores that sells vintage toys and used toys and stuff, and I came across a pretty good deal for a Stinger and the Wolverine. They
Oh
just didn't
yeah.
come with the drivers, but it was a pretty good deal for both. And I never had either one of those, so I was pretty excited to get those.
Well, and that's the fun of collecting vintage toys, is like, especially a line as expansive as, because the original Joe line, 82 to 94, and there's tons of stuff, but it's also finite. So
Yeah,
like everything you get even if you've still got years of stuff to buy, you are one step closer to a complete collection. So there's like a different, like with
Yep.
classified, we're going to be buying those things for the next at least 5 years or so, probably, with no idea how big the collection is going to be or when it's going to end. But when you're collecting old vintage stuff, you're checking it
Exactly.
off. It's
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Well, got to wrap this thing up. Before we go, is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything on the horizon that you want to mention?
I was just going to point out just real quick. One of the few covers I've
Yeah.
kept is actually this one here on my wall back there. It's the original art for 283 or 284 of A Real American Hero. It kind of featured Sherlock and all the other female Joe characters, and I just was always happy with how that one turned out. So that's one of the few I've held on to and didn't
that's awesome.
ever sell. And then that there is a big art print that Art Adams gave me and signed for me. That it's like, do you ever see the big commission he did? It's appropriate now for the timing because it was a Fantastic Four 100 cover that he redid and expanded. So there's like, I don't know, probably a few hundred characters on it.
Oh, it's got like everybody from the Legacy.
Yeah.
Basically of the Fantastic Four.
Legacy.
Yeah.
But I really liked it. He's like, oh, just have one, because I got to know him a bit at some shows we were guests together at.
That's awesome.
But anyhow, as far as what I'm doing now, right now, like most of the Magic the Gathering stuff I've worked on is just starting to like come out now and be revealed. So I've got that stuff coming out. But my main focus right now is my creator-owned book, which is what John Barber and I are doing. So John and I have worked together since about 2010, I think, when we started on Foundation, the tie-in book for Dark of the Moon. And then we worked on Robots in Disguise together, and then we worked on like the Bumblebee movie prequel and just different things off and on over the years. But right now, we're doing a creator-owned book called Signa, Signa, which is kind of like it's set in our future. It's sort of like broadly Star Wars meets Transformers sort of a thing. It's got some mechas, got like people kind of adventuring through space, but it's not like a space fantasy like Star Wars. It's kind of more of a hard sci-fi. So if there shouldn't be gravity, there's not going to be gravity. You know what I mean? Like,
nice. Yeah.
You know, it's like we try as much as we can to follow the rules with a little bit of comic booky rationalization here and there. But so yeah, it's like a sci-fi epic sort of a thing. And we did a Kickstarter for it that funded pretty quickly, so we're pretty happy with that. But it's got a publisher. But that was kind of one, to market it, and also to build capital for the new publisher that's putting it out. So the Kickstarter one should be coming out to people soon. It's actually printed. It's in John's hands. He's doing his autographs and stuff, and then he's going to send it to me, and then we'll get it out to people. And hopefully the actual like regular comic will come out to stores in July. So that's kind of my main focus right now.
All right, so be sure to ask your local comic shop for Signa.
Signa, yep.
Excellent. And where can we find you online?
I usually go by Glove Studios, so I post most of my like commissions, or when I have a new cover or a magic card or something, I can post online. I'll put it like on Instagram, and I use Blue Sky. I use Threads. What else? I got off Twitter, but like mostly because of when they got to the point where they said anything you put up they can use for their own AI. That's when I got off Twitter.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so I have a Tumblr page and like a DeviantArt page, but I haven't updated those in a while. But anyway, just search my name or Glove Studios. You'll find me, or my name in Transformers, and my name G.I. Joe and stuff like that.
Well, and like I said, this freshcomics.us has a pretty decent listing of your works if people want to dig in and see what you've done. That was awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you about the G.I. Joe and Transformers. I mean, two of my favorite things to talk about.
Yeah, same.
And I'm putting you down sometime in the future. I want to get you on an episode of Audible Interlude, and we'll just sit down and do a regular old episode talking G.I. Joe.
Please. Oh, and also, I'm supposed to be coming to Dragon Con this year too. So if you do a panel or anything, let me know.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We will see you there.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Smash that like button if you like Needless Things.